Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. My name is Taylor Rockwell, and I am sad. Not because the U.S. lost the Gold Cup final to Mexico, but because I forgot Ryan Bailey wouldn't be here, so now I'm hosting while agitated. It's gonna be great. Here with me in a somewhat more relaxed emotional state, we hope, is Mr. Graham Ruthven. Hello, Graham.
Hello, Taylor Rockwell. No indoor fireworks for you to start the show today?
Nope.
We all know that indoor fireworks are a great idea and definitely don't make it impossible to actually watch the match. I'm disappointed that there aren't any.
I thought this was a continuation of my concerns about July 4th fireworks and the possible ramifications of getting too close to them. Graham correctly pointing out that maybe a bunch of indoor fireworks don't make for the greatest viewing experience. Between that and grass laid on turf, laid on top of concrete. A really aesthetically pleasing game.
Great job, CONCACAF.
Graham,
As
on
those
that note,
fireworks were going off, they were like, "Who was that? Is that roof been closed the whole time?"
somebody turn on the vent fans. We got some work to do. Graham, on a scale of 0 to 10, how much did you enjoy Diego Luna at left wing back? 0?
About as much as Mauricio Pochettino, I think, seemed to enjoy it. So yeah, 0. Minus actually, I think. Just as much as I enjoyed Malik Tillman at wherever the heck he was playing.
Oh, we're starting early. The agitation for me is bleeding in. Making his triumphant return, the accountant's accountant himself, the outlaw's accountant himself. It's Joe Lowery, fresh from the wilds of the Dakota Territory.
Oh,
Joe,
man.
it's good to have you back.
I hate how accurate that is. Like that was my biggest disappointment reading through the Discord and the Out of Context channel, which is always gold, a gold mine for content nonetheless. And I read that and I'm like, my first reaction was, no, that's not. It's spot on. Frustratingly spot on. Glad to be back, fellas.
If it helps, what Jeff and I landed on when we were discussing the idea of Joe Lowery as an outlaw is that you would be the face, the confidence man. If you go Ocean's 11, you'd be the Matt Damon who's sort of like in doing the little groundwork and sort of like giving people a false sense of security while we're robbing them from behind. And then
Matt
Ryan
Damon's
is the
like the
getaway driver.
weeniest character in that movie. In Ocean's 11, he's like such a weenie.
I mean, if the weenie shoe fits, Joe.
Yeah,
If the weenie shoe fits.
Joe, did you come back with from the Dakotas with an outlaw hat and you were ready to wear it for the show today until you saw you'd been outdone by Alexei?
I bought the whole outfit. I had the spurs. I had whatever the chaps. That's a thing, right? Chaps. All the other
Joe was gonna roll into the show
stuff. And then I watched the Fox pregame, and I see Alexei riding on a stallion, and I just dumped it all. Like honestly, it was just a waste of money on my part. My bad, guys. I will be invoicing for that, however.
I missed it.
I don't know. I just saw the clip on social media. Didn't actually watch it. That's how I consumed that.
Was he rocking a cowboy hat for this one?
He was. Yeah. Yes.
There we go.
like 3 sizes too big for its head.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Maybe this game was a few sizes too big for the USMNT. At present, we're going to break it all down because it was close enough on paper, the U.S. taking the early lead courtesy of a Chris Richards header that definitely categorically went over the line.
100%.
Nice try. Everybody else who said it didn't. But it definitely did. The U.S. gets the 1-0 lead and then kind of sort of hangs on for dear life for the rest of the game. Mexico able to get the late winner off of a free kick that was totally valid and totally legit and not at all a dive. I'm not editorializing either in my introductions. Graham, let's start with you. Let's get some general thoughts on this one. How are you feeling coming out of this performance?
I thought it was a game that ultimately exposed the limitations of this group of US players, because let's be real, it wasn't a good performance. It was a bad performance. That's not to say that the whole match was bad for the US or that there weren't periods where I felt okay about what they were doing. But Mexico were the better team by a distance. They dictated the game, which was largely played on their terms. That was obviously to be expected because of their strength relative to the US. This is a Mexico team that will look pretty similar to the one that plays in the World Cup next year. You certainly can't say the same thing about the US in this game. I was actually happy enough with the first phase of this game from the US. Obviously,
the first
it helps
4 or 5
that they
minutes
score.
or so?
Yeah,
That sort
the
of
first
chunk?
4 minutes, whenever Chris Richards, when that ball definitely crosses the line, we don't need to look at it again. I was pleased. No, even after that, I didn't feel like Mexico were battering down the door. The US were still able to get forward in moments, kind of like in the first 15 minutes, and I felt they had just enough of a foothold in the game. But as the first half went on, Mexico just continued to turn the screw until the US couldn't get out. And obviously, when you're just facing so much pressure inside your own half, and Mexico have their fullbacks high and wide, that then allows their wingers to kind of spin off the fullbacks, get into space. it just became too much for the US. That was the worst period of the match for the US, was kind of like from 50 minutes till half-time, where they were sort of hanging on. The field tilt wasn't quite as extreme in the second half, but it was still the same like terms of the match, and the US weren't ever able to truly impose themselves. And after going behind in this game, or even before they go behind when they're chasing a winner, because like that's the aim of the game, is to win this match and win the trophy, they just were never able to create chances. I mean, I looked at the shot map this morning, and the Adjaman sort of scramble chance when him and Downs go through and goal, that's the only shot the US have inside the opposition box in the second half. So I don't think we can really argue that the stronger team won on the night.
Yeah, the USMNT's World Cup hopefuls, because that's what this roster was, right? This is tryout for next summer. Like, this is, can you make the varsity team for most of the players in this team? The U.S.'s group of World Cup hopefuls could not hang with full-strength Mexico. And I don't think anybody's surprised by that. Like, that's one of the reasons why I don't feel like devastated. I don't think U.S. fans should feel devastated about this game necessarily. Obviously, it's a rivalry game. You were in the game. There were opportunities to win it. Mexico at their full strength is still not that scary at this stage. I think I can understand being disappointed and frustrated by some things that we saw, and we'll talk through a bunch of that stuff. But that's part of it. I think the real disappointment comes, and we'll talk more about this on Wednesday's show actually as well, but I think some of the real disappointment from this game and from the Gold Cup as a whole for me, and I think for U.S. interested parties, including the players themselves and the coaching staff, is that a lot of the guys who we thought had a real shot to go and really like make a strong case, and a good game against Mexico in a final would have done a lot for that, more than any other game of this tournament, just didn't show up. Like Malik Tillman didn't show up in this game. Diego Luna didn't show up in this game. You run through the list of players, and all of the guys that we thought had a real chance to maybe claim something, and maybe they still will in Pochettino's eyes. I don't know. But to my eyes, all of those dudes pretty much were bad in this game, or at least were not nearly impactful enough.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Joe. And I think the Diego Luna point is worth diving into for a moment because he's one who I mentioned in the introduction when I was talking to Graham. And a lot of the coverage I've seen has been like Diego Luna was fairly anonymous in this game. The counterpoint being like, yeah, but he was asked to basically defend for the entire game, or at least until halftime. And I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure he was instructed to do that. At halftime, Pochettino talked to Jenny Taft and basically said that he had told Luna, we need you more advanced, we need you more involved, we need you more attacking. And I think at first I thought this was like a weird sort of disruption of what's being asked versus what is actually happening. But I think you all have talked me around to the idea that it was just sort of a game state of the U.S. was after that first 15 minutes that Graham outlined of going ahead and then a very chippy back and forth with lots of fouls, lots of free kicks. The game slowed down. I think around the 15th minute is when Mexico really started to put their foot on the ball, stamp their authority on the game, and it forced the U.S. back completely. And I think that is where I come away feeling more frustrated and a little bit sad about this performance. To the point you both have already made, it's more or less a full-strength Mexico. It is very much not a full-strength U.S. If you lose to that team, you lose to that team. But I think the manner of the defeat and how sort of just not at the races they looked for a good 30-minute stretch of the first half really took some wind out of my sails.
Yeah, the US just didn't have a way to win this game, particularly after the game state changes, after that opening goal. And the thing is, like, it's difficult to tell what was the game plan and what just ended up being the case because of the way the game panned out, the dynamic of the match. But if the game plan was to like sit deep and close up space and then play quickly into open space, I was okay with that. And I'll speak for myself here. I've always been okay with that with this US team. I'm absolutely fine with. I put a Blue Sky post out last night, like, when I was high on the first like 10 minutes of the game, and I was like, US are turning into tournament terrorists, right? Like, I'm okay with them being like Morocco at the last World Cup, but you still need ways to win the match, right? And I think of that Morocco team at the last World Cup, and they had Hakimi out down the right side, and they had Onana, and they had game breakers, and I'd hoped Luna and Tillman in particular would be those players in this game for the US, but they were never in a position to make a difference. I looked through some of the numbers at the end of the first half, and particular with those two players. Tillman was 6 out of 12 for passing, 3 out of 8 for duels won, 12 possessions lost, which is high. Luna, 12 out of 16 passing, 2 out of 8 duels, 6 possessions lost. Between them, they just had one dribble, not a single key pass, and I thought that kind of illustrated how the US was struggling to find him. Some of that is like on them. Maybe if Luna positioned himself a little bit higher, closer to Ajman, or someone gets closer to Ajman, because he had 6 touches of the ball, in the first half, which is another thing. Like maybe you, in those situations, you look to Aguiman to hold the ball in and bring others in, but that was difficult for him. So yeah, it was just nothing really worked for in the attack, other than the set piece, which is one of the big things coming out of this tournament, is between Berhalter and Jack McGlynn. Questionable whether either of them will actually make the World Cup roster next year, how much this will actually matter. But in the isolation of this tournament, the US were a real threat from set pieces, and that's where they were dangerous in this game as well.
I think that's a fair point, Graham, on the set piece front. I think also on the idea that you can be the pest, you can be the tournament terrorist, and you can bunker and frustrate and make your opponent effectively beat themselves. I think the difference for me, the issue for me on the night, was that the U.S. looked to be hanging on. And I think when you're defending, when you are sort of frustrating, you can have those little afters, you can have those little kicks, but you're also forcing your opponent into shooting from bad angles, or shooting when they shouldn't, or overhitting passes, or just starting to get a little bit restless when you're in possession. And there were a couple moments of that for Mexico, but largely it felt like they were never that bothered. It felt like they always had 5 to 10 yards of space. They were always able to find somebody open with a relatively straightforward, simple pass. And so the U.S. ended up being the one that was kind of having to try to cover ground, try to shift over, trying to plug holes. And I think those holes just kept expanding and expanding.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, I think they're almost fortunate that this was as close as it was, because I think those 30 minutes from minutes 15 to 45, Mexico could have and maybe should have certainly equalized, maybe gotten the lead, maybe gotten more than that. So I think that's where I end up feeling a little bit confused again, because the U.S. kind of played the game that we thought they would play. Once they took an early lead, we assumed that they would sit off and try to frustrate. I think it's just how ineffective they were at frustrating that stood out to me.
Yeah, I guess I'm not totally sure exactly what has confused you about this, Taylor, but I think maybe if I can try to summarize some of what you said and also my thoughts on this game.
Why could Mexico always pass the ball, Joe?
Well, and we'll talk about that. So
why were there
maybe
always
we should
three
talk about
guys
that.
open?
Let's talk about that sooner rather than later.
Sure.
But really, the summary of, I don't think any of us have an issue with the U.S. being a more defensive team against equal or better opposition, right? You're not going to get those opportunities against Guatemala. You're not going to get those opportunities against some of the teams that the U.S. plays in Gold Cups, and maybe even a couple of games at the World Cup. But in games where you're equal or lesser than, we see teams all over the world sit back a little bit deeper and try to play in transition. And this is not new for the U.S. Greg Berhalter did a very similar thing at times in games against equal or better teams. Like this is not new stuff for Pochettino. He has not reinvented anything here. The thing is, if you want to do that and have success with it, you have to do it well. And that's what we're dancing around. The U.S. didn't do it well in this game. They didn't attack well. And that was a huge problem for some of their defensive stuff. And maybe we'll start there as to why the U.S. had so much trouble going and containing Mexico. Actually, I want to do one thing first. The other thing as to why this game maybe felt bad but didn't get really bad is because Mexico's not that good. And I know I kind of already illustrated that, but Alvarado running at Max Arfsten wasn't that scary in this game. And it should be scary because Max Arfsten is not a good 1v1 defender, and he was left 1v1 quite a few times in this game. Alexis Vega running 1v1 at Alex Freeman should be kind of scary, but Alexis Vega is like a useful international player but is not crazy good. So the U.S. in some ways were let off the hook in this game, and I don't actually really think that this was maybe more than a 1-goal game on balance towards Mexico, because Mexico don't have the horses to go out there and punish you in the way that some other teams would. That's
Joe,
one thought. Yeah, go ahead.
Joe, can I just jump in to say, to your point about Alexis Vega, to highlight that there's an amazing moment in the second half before they take the lead when it's either a free kick or just a shot that I don't know if it's a shot. I don't know if it's a cross, but he hits it Vega like 20 yards over the goal and also wide of the far post. And they cut to Javier Aguirre. This is for, I guess, YouTube viewers. And he just sits there silently for a good 3 Mississippi and then, and then just screams. And he held it together as long as he could. So, yes, there were moments, I think, when Mexico showed their relative lack of quality. I think you are right, Joe, to just outline that this is not a new thing. Like, I shouldn't be confused by what the U.S. were trying to do. I think it was just the lack of execution that has me feeling muddled. So let's do this. Let's take a break. Let's come back in. We'll talk about maybe some of those issues, some of that failure to execute, some of the game states as this match played out. Back very soon. Welcome back to the Total Soccer Show. We continue to talk about the USA's 2-1 loss to Mexico in the Gold Cup final. Joe, since you've been gone, being the Outlaws accountant out on the road, out in the wilds, we leave it to you to start off with what went wrong for the U.S. on the evening.
All right, so I think I have like a 4-pronged thesis, but I'm not going to run through all 4 prongs. So I'm going to start with 1 prong, and we'll hit them all by the time the show's over. I think a lot of the U.S.'s defensive issues, because we've talked about how they were pinned back for most of the game, all things considered, right? Graham's right. The U.S. had some of the ball. They had a foothold in the game for the first 15 minutes. And then they're pinned, and they're pinned, and they're pinned, and you get the goal from Raul Jimenez, and then you get the olays from the Mexican crowd in Houston, and you're like, all right, what's happening? Like, why can the U.S. not get out? I think one of the issues as to why the U.S. could not get out of their own half or out of their own third was from how poor they were at actually doing that, like at getting out on the break with the ball. So you finally win the ball, and we'll talk about why the U.S. had trouble winning the ball in this game. But you finally do it, right? You miraculously end up with the ball at your feet. Why can you not somehow get forward? And that, I think the U.S. are really sloppy in this game. There's multiple Malik Tillman passes inside the first 20 minutes where he's turning it over. 11th minute, sloppy pass intercepted. 20th minute, sloppy pass looking for Berhalter. When the U.S. finally have possession in their own half, it rolls out of bounds and the ball goes back to Mexico. 22nd minute, bad pass, turnover from Malik Tillman. Like, it was bad. Tillman was atrocious in this game. That was a problem, and he wasn't the only problem in that phase of play where the U.S. is trying to mercifully transition out of their own third into the attack. Tim Ream had some nice line-breaking passes in the press break. The U.S. mostly gave up on breaking the press pretty early in this game, and he was turning the ball over at times, playing through that initial counter pressure from Mexico. Tyler Adams, we're right out of the second half. The U.S. is like, all right, this is an opportunity. We're still 1-1. This can be a moment where we can go and get a foothold in this game like we did in the first 15 of the first half. 47th minute, Tyler Adams turns the ball over on a super simple giveaway in the middle. I think it's right in the center circle, and Mexico are running right at the U.S. men's national team. That's part of this. The other part of this, the last prong I have of this particular bullet point, is that positionally, I think Patrick Agyemang was so isolated in this game, where I think he did a pretty good job, by and large, of holding the ball up. Not perfect. I think we know who Patrick Agyemang is. I don't know that we need to have the full discourse of him in this game. He's incredible at like winning some field position, big, strong. I cannot really move the rock. He was actually doing a good bit of hold-up play in this game, but the distance between him and Malik Tillman, or between him and Seb Berhalter on the right, or him and Luna on the left, was massive. And so when the ball would go into Agyemang, he had so much work to do, and maybe he would win the foul. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe the play would die. That did happen in this game at times. Maybe he would win the foul. Then the U.S. won the ball, and they're ineffective yet again in possession. So because the U.S. were so sloppy, I think, on the ball in this game, it just forced them to defend more, and that exacerbated other problems that we'll talk about shortly.
Yeah. Joe, I think you've outlined that prong very well. I look forward to the next three. But I would just add the other aspect of that I thought was really worth noting and really started to stand out to me was how often the U.S. either didn't win the first ball when they would sort of, like when Mexico would clear where there would be a hopeful long ball or whatever, that they would either not win that header, not win that 50-50, or if they did, it was often played right to a Mexican player or sort of just lumped back in, and then it's another 50-50. And it's really difficult to like win a cushioned header and put it right on someone's foot. Don't get me wrong. It's really difficult to win a contested header and put it right on your teammate's foot or right in the direction of a teammate. But I think the number of times it happens with Richards, it happens with Ream, it happens with Adams, it happened routinely in this game. To me, it started to feel like nerves, and it started to feel like I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to be at fault here. So I'm not going to try to slow it down. I'm not going to try to find a pass. I'm just going to get it clear, and then we'll see what happens from there. And that's great that you're winning the ball. That's great that you're kind of theoretically keeping it away from danger, but you're also never giving your team an opportunity to reset or retain possession or just find a foothold to get back into this game. It felt like it was always just giving the ball right back to Mexico and then saying, now you try to beat us again, and we'll try to hold on.
It was so rushed. Every time the US won the ball, I thought Tillman was probably the worst culprit of that. He was doing a lot of charging around, and off the ball, that's good in a sense. And he was one of the few who seemed to be giving Mexico problems, kind of getting through the first line of confrontation, which I thought was an issue as the first half wore on. Was just how easily they were able to step into the midfield, and they pretty much had every outfield player in the US half towards the end of that period of the match. But there were also 2 or 3 quick attacks that come from, initially they come from Tillman being able to read the situation quicker, or he snaps into a tackle quicker than anyone else. But the flip side of that was it was just so rushed whenever he got into those final third areas. There's one, like I think maybe about 38 minutes where, okay, he's got Agyemang as the only option ahead of him. Agyemang's run, I think he's trying to take a defender away so that Tillman can then move into the centre. There's another couple Mexican players there that doesn't quite pan out in the way that Agyemang, I think, had hoped with his run. But in that situation, I just want him to turn back and just keep the US high up the pitch. He tries to do a little bit too much on his own. I thought that was a problem for him throughout the match, and that would just, I thought that was a tone for a number of players. Tyler Adams, like, I thought had one of his worst games that I've seen for the US. I think his movement for the first Mexico goal is kind of what starts the domino effect of why that space opens up for Mexico. His passing was slack as well. So, yeah, and he didn't have a great tournament as a whole. And I saw Doyle last night saying, like, we need to have a wider discussion about Tyler Adams. I wouldn't go that far because he comes into this tournament with an injury. I also stand by what I said like a few months ago, which was Adams for Bournemouth was playing like the best ball of his career, I thought, for at least 2 or 3 months. So I'm not hugely worried about Tyler Adams, but I hope he gets some rest before the new season because he might need it on this basis. I thought he was one of the poorer players on the pitch.
So you all might know, listeners might know, I tend to like Tyler Adams. I tend to defend him a little bit. I'm going to do that here, but I want to add that. So there's a grain of salt to this. And I think you're both right about him, especially in possession, and I don't think he really covered himself in glory with a lot of his passing and decision-making. But that's kind of long been the knock against him. Joe's outlined that really, really well, how he's sort of limited with his progressive passes and with some of his kind of vertical passing. I think the defensive side of things, I hear what you're saying, Graham, and he is definitely the one who gets posterized on that first goal because he's so caught out of position. I would argue he's caught out of position because he's trying to track literally 3 players at once because he's being asked to do so many things. And Joe, I'm guessing this gets to one of your prongs as to what went wrong, that the U.S., for a huge chunk, if not all of the first half, were so deep and so hesitant to step that Mexico basically, from like 25 to 35 yards from the U.S. goal, never really came under pressure and had so much time and joy to pass the ball that Tyler Adams was routinely having to try to mark one guy while also track the person on the ball while also tracking an overlapping run. And I think in trying to do 3 things at once, he oftentimes ended up doing none of them particularly well. So, Joe, with that introduction, was a failure to step on your list, on your prongs?
Yes, it is one of the prongs. I wish I would have made it 3, and I could have had a trident, because tridents are just cooler than whatever quadrant I'm constructing right now.
As we learned
anyway,
from Aquaman 2, sometimes tridents have 5 prongs, though, so you're fine.
Yes, I definitely watched that from that film that I 100% watched.
I haven't watched that film, but from the podcast that made fun of it, I learned that that's a key part of the film. There you go.
Good pull. Yeah, I think the U.S.'s backline was extremely timid in this game, which made it very easy for Mexico to access space between the lines. And this is one of the many defensive issues that I think plagued the U.S. in this match. But the first moment where I really clocked it is in the 13th minute, where the U.S. are back defending in their 4-4-2 structure. Same exact lineup for this game, by the way, as the other 2 knockout round games that the U.S. have had. So a very familiar group of players. Maybe they've lost a little bit of gas in the tank. But it's the 13th minute. The U.S. are back defending. And Mexico break lines. And it's to Mora, the 16-year-old, who is awesome, by the way, who is like so good. Buy your stock now. 13th minute, Arfson doesn't step to Mora between the lines, which allows Mora to turn, and Mexico can play forward. And it's so simple, right? It looks so simple. It's so easy for them. The U.S. almost never made life difficult for Mexico by applying pressure to the ball. And I'll lump in another prong here because I think they are related. It wasn't just the back line not stepping forward to apply pressure, which really left a lot of space between the lines for Mexico to receive, turn, and play forward without really having to worry at all. It was also the front line who could not figure out how to apply pressure to the ball. And Taylor, you and I texted a little bit about this. It is Mexico building almost always in possession in a 3-2-5, which we see all the time, but it's Edson Alvarez dropping next to Montez and Vasquez in the back line to give Mexico a base of 3 in build-up. And the U.S. defended in a 4-4-2, which is okay, right? It gives you some numbers in midfield, it gives you some protection for the back line. But Malik Tillman and Pat Ajiman were outnumbered for an hour. For an hour of this game, they were outnumbered. And Mexico, all they had to do was cycle possession across their back 3, maybe bounce the ball into Mora or bounce the ball into a center mid, then they bounce it to the wide center back. And that center back could stride forward completely unbothered. And the U.S.'s inability to pressure Mexico's early stage of their possession in the U.S.'s own half made it so easy for Mexico to then break lines. There's a moment in the 26th minute where Tillman is so slow to get pressure on Johan Vasquez that Vasquez has, I kid you not, like 5 seconds to go and stride forward completely unopposed and break lines to Alexis Vega. Tillman and Berhalter in this clip, and Freeman and Berhalter also not on the same page whatsoever in that sequence. But it's an issue throughout the first hour of this game. And we don't see it change at all until the 61st minute or so, when Diego Luna finally steps forward because he's been back doing desperation defending, because he's had to track back because the U.S. don't get pressure to the ball, which means that Mexico are advancing, which means the U.S. have to drop back into their shell. Luna, in the 61st minute or so, finally steps forward, and he's the third number. So you have Tillman, Ajiman. You had that all game long, well, that they were in the game. And then Luna steps forward, and all of a sudden you're 3v3. And all of a sudden you have pressure to the ball. And the U.S. jump, everybody steps forward in the own half still, but everybody jumps forward, and the U.S. forced a turnover. And those were like gold in this game, because the U.S. could not figure out how to get numbers forward. I think there were some player issues in this game. The attacking stuff that I mentioned already, I think falls quite heavily on the players and their ineffectiveness. I don't understand how the U.S. got through an hour of this game, falling to that same 2v3 in the front over and over and over again. That one, I think, falls pretty heavily on Pochettino, it would seem to me, unless I mean, we're not privy to everything, but that seems like a wild thing that happened for so long in this game, and the U.S. could never get a foothold, I think primarily even, because their front line were passengers. They had no way to combat that 3v2 for Mexico, and it killed the U.S.
Yep, as Joe said, we texted a little bit about this. I grabbed that same moment in like the 61st or 62nd minute, and it's not just that Luna being forward allows you to go 3v3 and apply that pressure. Joe is correct in that. It's also that even if Mexico bypass that, even if they do have possession further up the pitch, there's a great moment of this when basically they do get possession into a more advanced position, but when they go to recycle possession, Luna is now there, Tillman is now there, Ajamang is now there. They've kind of cut off half of the pitch, and you cannot slowly recycle possession. They no longer, Mexico, have that player who's open with 10 yards of space to kind of slow it down and find the next pass. And that, to me, was the thing that was killing the U.S. in the first half, was no matter what they did, there was always at least one L3 player open, if not two, if not three. And so no matter what you're doing, you're never really making life that difficult for them. But once you have that sort of balance in the way you're applying pressure up top, but you also cut off the kind of safe options, you force Mexico into kind of riskier passes or hopeful balls that you can then contest and win, or possession that you can win back. Joe pointed this out in our text chat. In that sequence, when the U.S. finally have things right, they win the ball back and they immediately turn it back over, which speaks to maybe a lack of security on the ball. I would also say, this is where, again, I agree with you, Joe, that like a lot of this falls on Poch, is that like the Tillman aspect of this on the defensive side has to be mentioned, because if you have that imbalance, that 3v2 up top, bringing Tillman back isn't really going to change that much in my mind. And yes, it's going to leave Ajamang even more isolated and exposed, but he was kind of going to be that way anyway. But what bringing Tillman deeper into maybe like a 4-5-1 defensively does is it just gives you more options in the middle. And on the Mexico goal, the equalizer, as I said, it's Adams being pulled out because now there's a safe kind of like drop option, but there's still numbers in the middle, and he's trying to kind of split the difference. And when he moves out, even before he moves out, he and Luca De La Torre are, I would say, 20 yards apart, and that's meant to be your defensive kind of midfield pairing. When you have the two of them 20 yards apart in the middle of the pitch, 20 yards from their own goal, that's a fairly sizable hole for Mexico to eventually attack and exploit. So I think that lack of midfield three from the jump caused huge problems for the United States, and I get why Pochettino wanted Tillman closer to Ajamang. I don't think they ended up getting that, even with that being the stated objective, but it left the U.S. exposed time and time again.
Yeah, and that situation that you highlight there, Taylor, it's the worst of both worlds for the US, where there is spacing laterally between those players, but the midfield line is collapsed basically on top of the defensive line. That comes from the situation that Joe was outlining with being able to play through the first line of confrontation so easily, where that midfield line is just getting deeper, deeper and deeper. The defensive line can't go any deeper because they're basically on the edge of their own box anyway. And so if you do get a little moment of miscommunication, I still think it's, I mean, look, there's like 5 different dominoes in that sequence that all fall, so you could blame like 5 different players. But, you know, if that's higher up the pitch and Adams, when he gets pulled out, you're maybe not one single pass away from releasing Raul Jimenez into the box to get turned and have a shot on goal. So it was just one thing led to the next, and that was kind of illustrated by the way that first goal was conceded. As good as a goal as it was from Mexico, the little pass is brilliant, and the finish from Jimenez is just an absolute rocket into the roof of the net. But there was stuff the US did that led to that.
Yeah, I've roasted Mexico a bit, so I will say that is like a phenomenal goal, and they did have technical quality in midfield in this game. Like Marcel Ruiz, I thought had a quite nice game in midfield, and he's the one who plays that pass, right? It is so slick to beat the U.S. And Mora was so much fun to watch in this game as well. I do want to amend one thing I said earlier. You can see Luna try to step forward more proactively in the first 15 minutes of the second half. It doesn't really reap anything. It doesn't really create many great opportunities for the U.S. to turn the ball over until that 60-second minute sequence. But you do see Luna intentionally move forward. And I think that is something that Pochettino did adjust at halftime. So maybe I'm a tiny bit too harsh there. But the first half hurt the U.S. And it didn't seem like they ever truly recovered from a lot of that stuff. And even when the U.S. did generate some pressure to the ball, it wasn't comprehensive. It wasn't like Luna would go and step, and Ajiman would kind of like waltz over and help out, or Tillman would kind of like lackadaisically move over. And it didn't feel that like organized from the U.S. defensively. And that does kind of lead me to my final prong of this four-pronged behemoth.
You've made
of
it
a
three
weapon.
now. You've made it three. You combined 2 and 3, so now we're back to 3
Sweet.
prongs. You're good.
It's a trident all along. Knew it from the start. This was the U.S.'s back line and their like wide midfielders, and this ties into the Luna playing as a wingback thing, just never really sorted out their rotations. And this also ties into the goal. Where if you go even if you just freeze frame the first Mexico goal, not the Edson Alvarez set piece goal in the second half, if you freeze the first goal, really, there are all these issues that we've already talked about, where Seb Berhalter and Tyler Adams have come over to do the wide defending, which leaves Alex Freeman with nothing to do until all of a sudden he has everything to do and is too slow to rotate back inside because he's not really aware that that's his job, because he thinks it's Tyler Adams' job, and all of a sudden you have Arfston, Ream, and Richards centrally dealing with one player and Raul Jimenez, and then all of a sudden they're not dealing with one player anymore because Ortiz has gone and made that run, and all of a sudden it is so messy for the U.S. so fast. And it wasn't just that goal sequence. This game was filled with U.S. wide players in particular, although the center mids of De La Torre and Adams fell into this too. It was filled with those players really not being organized and a lot of like doubt about who they were supposed to track and when they were supposed to track them. This happened all throughout the game. Luna and Arfston in a 2v2 in the 13th minute, which is a fine scenario over on the left side for the U.S., all of a sudden, Mexico are running in behind because those two players didn't rotate quickly enough and didn't communicate and position themselves well enough. 57th minute, where Alexis Vega just runs free behind the U.S. backline, where neither Luna nor Arfston are doing anything about it, and Marcel Ruiz can just run forward as well out of the midfield to play that pass to Vega in behind. Those things happened over and over again. So I really do think that prong stems from the U.S.'s inability to pressure the ball a little bit higher up the field. They were chasing shadows for so much of this game. I think some of it is naivete, maybe some of it is nerves. Some of it is maybe like Luna and Berhalter still probably aren't quite ideal outside defenders, although Luna is probably better suited to it than said Berhalter in some ways. Alex Freeman and Arfston are not lockdown 1v1 fullbacks. You had all of those things, the personnel and the tactics together, and you had a game that Mexico just dominated when it comes to the territory.
And the US didn't learn their lesson from the Guatemala game in the semi-final, where Taylor, we highlighted Berhalter and Freeman in heated discussion more than once over those rotations and who was tracking who. And so that's been a consistent thing throughout this tournament, particularly on that right side. On the left side as well, we saw it between Ream and Arfston at points in the Costa Rica game with the balls over the top that continually targeted that side. So, yeah, it was a weakness for the US throughout this tournament, including this game.
And I think one more point before we go to break. I think like you all have done a really good job of encapsulating it there at the end. That it's naivete, it's nerves, it's a lack of quality, it's tactical mistakes, it's Pochettino getting some things wrong. And I think that's where I always end up feeling sort of the worst about the USMNT. When it is Berhalter got his tactics wrong, Pochettino got his tactics wrong. You can understand that. You can then use that as an opportunity to learn and get better. When it's they were overawed by the occasion, or they were like technically inferior, as was the case I think against the Dutch in the 2022 World Cup in the knockout round. Again, I can get my head around that. But when there are so many different little things that all play a part, it gets much murkier. And I personally do not do well when things are murky. I like to understand what's going wrong. I like to at least have an idea of what the problem is. Our ice maker doesn't work right now. I have no idea why. I know the ice maker doesn't work, so at least I know that. But not knowing even one possible explanation completely befuddles and enrages
I'm
me
now envisaging
simultaneously.
Taylor just shaking the ice maker.
Well, it's helpful that we had it repaired a week ago, and it did make ice the one time, and then we use that ice, and there's no more ice.
Bragging about having ice to a desert dweller. Wow. Know your audience, Taylor. Read the room. That's what a privilege that is. We drink our water boiling. Thank you very much.
I don't know if you're lying. I really
No,
don't.
you never
but like,
will.
I may have brought some of my personal life into this, or my personal first world problems, but I think that's why I end up more frustrated by this, because you can easily explain this away as, CONCACAF officials, should have been a handball, should have been a penalty. I would argue Alexis Vega definitely dives for the free kick. Chris Richards would argue that he was infringed upon by Montes, who would have been offside, so it should have been called back. I think there's other fouls that could have been given. I think there's other yellow cards. All of that is true against Mexico's A team with the U.S.'s B- team, maybe. And so, like, you can then put all that together and say, so this was fine, and this was an okay result. But I think not really having a clear understanding of what specifically went wrong, because I think so many different little things accumulated in this loss, is where I end up feeling as annoyed as my ice maker tends to make me feel.
I certainly won't. I won't jip you out of like feeling annoyed, Taylor. That is absolutely you're right. I do again though. Just want to summarize like all those things that we said. What was it? Like nerves, naivety, tactical issues. I think we can summarize those into two things. The U.S.'s game plan didn't work in this game. Like they were outplayed tactically. I think that seems very clear. And the players didn't execute. And I don't know. The first thing is a bit of a disappointment because you hire Pochettino and you think, man, this guy's going to solve a lot of the U.S.'s tactical problems, and that didn't happen in this game, and that's disappointing. That is absolutely a concern, don't get me wrong. But it's not, like, unfathomable that would happen. And the other thing is, this is not the U.S. team that's going to be at the World Cup. Like, some of these players are, yes. I think Ream, Richards, Freeze, maybe, Adams, yes. Other than that, are we confident that any of the other players on the field are going to be a starting player at the World Cup? I'm not. I'm not there yet, even though I wish that we were after this tournament. I don't think it's a surprise that the U.S. players were overawed and like were generally ineffective. So again, I know I'm cold and I'm man, I don't want to change it to the accountant's accountant. I'm the outlaw's accountant.
There you go.
But I don't know. It just doesn't seem really all that strange to me that the game played out sort of in the way that it did.
A helpful dose of reality. Thank you, Joe Lowery. Let's take one more break. We'll talk about some individual performances, some blue sky takeaways, a few other things. Back soon. Welcome back to the Total Soccer Show. We are into the third segment, which I am now going to call the Beating a Dead Horse segment, Graham, because it's time to talk Pochettino's in-game substitutions and adjustments. Take it away, Graham.
Yeah, this has become a trend at this tournament. Made me question some things about Mauricio Pochettino and the manager that we thought he was. Yeah, once again, the in-game changes here were ineffective, and I just never saw how they were going to change the match for the US. I mean, obviously the most consequential change is Downs coming on for Del Torre, which obviously puts two up top, so that does change the approach quite dramatically.
I don't think anything was obvious about that change, because that's the one where there is at least 2 minutes of players screaming at each other and Pochettino screaming at everybody else about where people were supposed to be.
Yeah, it seems like there was a lot of confusion over how that was going to work, and we didn't really get much evidence in the match of how that was meant to work, even accounting for the Adjaman chance where Downs is right there, and the two of them are basically on top of each other, which is, to my mind, is not how a front pairing should work. Like, there should be an option for Adjaman if he gets there first, or Downs if he gets there first, to play it to the other one anyway. It didn't really work. And then McGlynn comes on for Adams, which I think was designed to try and supply the forward line to get back into the game. That didn't really work. As I say, there's that Adjaman Downs chance at the end. Other than that, it wasn't like the US created a lot of opportunities to get back into the game. And I think the changes, so like there's two different sides to this argument, but then you can like flip it back on Poch again, even after you account for those two sides of the arguments. The other side of the argument is, well, who was on the bench to change this game for the US meaningfully? The depth in this squad, like I think these changes just highlighted how weak this squad was as a whole. But some of that is down to the choices that Poch made for this squad. Where were the wingers? Like, it was the most glaring deficiency. We talked about this when this squad was announced. Oh, there's no wingers. And I think that's like the most, for me coming at this tournament, that is the most concerning thing, is ahead of the tournament, I gave Poch the benefit of the doubt and said, well, there's no wide attackers in this team besides Haji Wright, who obviously goes home early with an injury. That didn't help things, that accentuated the issues. But I gave him the benefit of the doubt in thinking, there must be a plan here to account for that. They're still going to have threat in wide areas. There was no plan, or like there wasn't anything that was apparent to me. So in a game like this, you would ideally want someone with a bit of verticality, a bit of speed. Again, that might have been Hadji right. I do account for that. But would Josh Sargent have given the US? So I'm not Josh Sargent's biggest fan, by the way. I always feel like I'm a bit of a downer on Josh Sargent. But would he have been a different option in this squad? Yes, he would have been a different option. Would Zendejas, again, a player that I'm not totally sold on, but in terms of his profile, would he be a different profile in this squad to what the US had? Yes. I mean, we'll never know if these players would have changed It's a leap to suggest that they change the game, they come on in this match and everything's fine and the US lift the trophy. But throughout this tournament, the US was never able to change games. It was something we saw in this match. It was something we saw in the Guatemala match to a concerning degree, where there was like real confusion over not just the changes that they made, but the sequence of the changes that they made, until it got to the point where it was like, just throw in Walker Zimmerman to see this game out. That didn't exactly say to me that there was a coherent game plan behind the in-game management. It happened in the Costa Rica game as well, which I actually think, on the whole, I know they get taken to penalties in that game. I think that was probably the US's best performance, accounting for the standard of opposition in the whole tournament. They still draw that game 2-2 because some of the in-game stuff we saw in the second half. So, yeah, it's one of those things that has me questioning Pochettino and his ability to manage games, which is going to be crucial at a tournament like the World Cup next summer.
Yeah, we're in a position now where I have in my notes, would Joe Scally have made this team better, given the way he wanted Freeman to play? Given the way we saw Freeman kind of stay home more often than not.
Possibly, yeah.
And that's what Joe Scally does well. And I did not think I would be in a position where I'm advocating for Joe Scally to be back in this team, but here we are. So, a little confused by that. A lot confused by the Damian Downs substitution. Not for the substitution itself, but because Downs comes on. I told you all this in the pre-show chat. Comes on. Clearly whispers into Diego Luna's ear, like what the new instructions are, what the new tactical briefing will be. Luna then moves central, Downs moves up top, play resumes, and Stu Holden in the broadcast immediately points out that Pochettino is now on the touchline screaming at everyone because no one is in the right position. And for the next minute or two, it is Adam screaming at Berhalter telling him that they have to wait until the ball is out of play to figure things out, Downs looking like he's definitely on the pitch but not fully aware that he's on the pitch, Luna not quite sure where he needs to be. And it's not as though the U.S. were dominant prior to this, but it was a good 5 to 10 minute stretch of the U.S. applying more aggressive pressure, forcing Mexico back. There's the Adams yellow card moment, which isn't great, but it's a sign of the intent of the press and the effort the U.S. were putting in, and they were disrupting. They were causing problems, and they had wrested back control a little bit. I wouldn't say they were in control, but instead of it being 70-30 Mexico, it felt like 55-45, like they were starting to kind of get a foothold. And then there's just this chaotic moment where no one quite knows what's expected, where they're expected to be or what they're meant to do. And in figuring that out, they're forced back again, and it's a Mexico throw deep, and they don't really recover for the next 5 to 10 minutes. And those are the kind of mistakes that really cost you, and they're really simple mistakes. And I don't know if that was Downs not listening to the instructions, being confused what the instructions actually were. Maybe he gets the wrong info as he's coming on. But either way, it's a very basic mistake that could have been easily prevented and wasn't, and led to Pochettino trying to scream over 70,000 people to say, no, he's supposed to be the central midfielder, not him. And it didn't really quite work for a good couple minutes.
It was like delightfully on brand for the US's generally disorganized performance in this game. It just felt so fitting that you would end up somehow with a Diego Luna, Tyler Adams double pivot for like 90 seconds. It fit the theme. Let's put it that way.
I can see the appeal, is all I'm going to say. Since we've been somewhat too largely negative about this, speaking for myself, are there any positives that we should note? Maybe positive individual performances, Graham?
Chris Richards.
That's the one.
I think he's probably the biggest individual plus point coming out of this tournament for the US, because I said before when we did our preview for this tournament, I said that I lived in hope that we might see FA Cup winning Chris Richards from this tournament. I think we got a bit of that. In this game, he made more clearances than any player on the pitch. He won more headers. He won both of the tackles that he made. So we got the defensive basics from Richards in this game, and I'm willing to forgive him for the first Mexico goal, because I think he's stepping out because of the issues ahead of him, so it's not purely on him. What I thought was lacking in this game was some of the line-breaking passing we saw in previous games in this tournament, because I thought he was excellent, particularly in that Guatemala game. I think he leads that like stats column coming out of that game. I'm sure he was the most prolific line-breaking passer in that game for the US. But again, it was difficult for him given what was ahead of him. Like, who was he passing the ball into? And then obviously he was a set-piece threat with his goal, and that connection between Richards and Berhalter, that obviously they combined for a goal against Saudi Arabia. I'm sure there's a really good chance against Costa Rica as well, where Keylor Navas pulls off a save. That was that connection again. So the two of those players were on the same wavelength, and in a game where the US were just so limited, to have that threat was at least worth something. So I think, look, we were always going to judge this tournament on individuals and whether they had locked in a place. Right now, I would say if the World Cup was tomorrow, Chris Richards is absolutely starting in that back four, whereas coming into that tournament, that might have been a question mark.
Yeah,
Joe?
Richards was a huge winner from this tournament overall. I think, and this got brought up a lot in the Fox broadcasts and chatting with people who were covering the U.S. on the ground throughout the summer, Richards has taken on that leadership role in a real way, and like has sought it out and has embraced it, and I think has backed it up with his performances on the field. He was almost perfect in his duels in this game. There's a moment in the first half where he gets, I think, out-dueled by Jimenez, but largely excellent in the air. And that set-piece goal, the technical execution of it is incredible. Like, that is so difficult to be able to get enough power at the angle that the ball comes in from said ball. It's a good ball into the box. It gives Richards a chance to make a play on it, but that play is so difficult to make. Richards is close to aerially dominant, and I wish we would have gotten a chance to see him making a few more plays in space in this game, because that would have meant that the U.S. had to actually step forward to pressure the ball a little bit, which we didn't see. So I think Richards was very good. I didn't think Tim Ream had a notable performance in this game whatsoever. He wasn't involved in as many moments.
Joe,
and
can I ask you
I
a
don't
Ream
want to stray too
question?
far into Ream myself, because I think we're going to talk about him more on Wednesday when we look ahead a little bit.
I do have one question for you, though, because I can't shake the feeling that, like, and we talked about this a little bit in a couple of the games in the Gold Cup, but the U.S. kind of not stepping out, not being as aggressive with when they would step forward, I do start to come around to the idea that maybe there's a concern that Tim Ream isn't particularly fleet of foot, and you don't really want to leave him in a position where he has to close ground very quickly. Does that represent a concern for you, or is it fairly low on the list of concerns at this point?
It's not all that low on the list of concerns.
Okay.
I am certainly concerned that Tim Ream, probably if the World Cup started tomorrow, and probably if the World Cup starts on time next summer, is going to be starting next to Chris Richards. I do not think that's ideal, and I think that is absolutely a possible explanation for why the U.S. were so timid. I'm not sure about it, but it seems possible. Like, in general, you don't want to leave Tim Ream, Max Arfsten, or Alex Freeman at this level isolated 1v1. That's not a super comfortable place to be when you feel pretty bad about 3 of the 4 options in your back line having to do some isolated defending. Yeah, Ream presents problems. He solves some problems, but he presents a lot more. And if a really good center back were to emerge for the U.S. in the next year, I think that would answer a pretty big question.
Austin Trusty.
No, I said a pretty good center back, Taylor.
Oh,
That's
my mistake. I misheard.
Yeah.
One, I guess, positive for me. I know Tyler Adams will come in for much criticism. I've really enjoyed troll Tyler Adams. I like that he has at least one of those moments every game. He has it in this one when he gets that yellow and has the sort of like it's a very CONCACAF moment in my mind. Has the audacity to be like, what? I didn't even get him. It's like, you clattered him hard. Then as he's walking away, I think a Mexican player has a word with him. And you can very clearly see Tyler Adams telling the player what he thinks he should do with his mouth, put it that way. But just those sort of moments, those little kind of like prickly moments, I think are important. I think having a player who can antagonize and get people riled up and get under their skin. I think Diego Luna can do it at times on the ball. I think Tyler Adams can do it off the ball. So I enjoyed that.
Berhalter as well. I enjoy Berhalter's vibe. There was a moment in that first 50 minutes, which I was enjoying, where he kind of basically gets into wrestling like maneuver with a couple of Mexico players, and that's when I messaged their Slack. Like, I was basically growling at the TV at that point, because it was Poch has brought the proper football man out of me, because that's been so lacking from so many performances that I enjoy seeing that, but you obviously need a bit more to win a match.
Graham just said he was growling at his TV watching Sebastian Berhalter play soccer. I never want to hear a single thing about how I'm too nerdy about soccer or too into MLS or Sebastian Berhalter when Graham just said that sentence out loud.
Graham, what time was this on television for you? Midnight?
It started at midnight, yeah. Finished at half 2
I
or
just
something.
picture your wife, like, peeking her head in the door, like, did I just hear you growling at the television? Like, yeah, it was a defensive moment, and the American hugged the guy, and she was like, what have they done to you? Like, I feel so bad. But I like that moment as comical and sort of embarrassing as it looks for Berhalter, because it's just him, like, holding on for dear life. But it's really clear that he has been told, mark Raul Jimenez no matter what, and he is trying to stay on him, and Mexico are trying to screen him. It's Edson Alvarez, I think, in this moment, who's trying to kind of block him off and step in between. And Berhalter is holding on to Jimenez so much that he basically gets pulled around and has that weirdness moment that is a little bit of the dog in him. But I like that. I like that physicality and intensity. I did like that with a few players, it feels like we do have options, at least depth options. And I haven't loved Max Arfsten at times in this tournament, but I thought he was better defensively, even though I think Diego Luna had to basically hold his hand at times defensively in the first half. I still think he was better, and then I still think he offered something in the attack. So it's certainly a step or two down the ladder if Jedi is hurt or needs a break or, is suspended for a game in the World Cup, but I won't be as frustrated as I think I would have been watching Arfsten a couple games ago. On the flip side, I've got some concerns about Freeman, Joe. I don't think this was a very good tournament for him. I thought he was still positionally pretty unsound. I think his lack of communication and his lack of confidence in that communication was really telling. And then watching the winning goal for Mexico, it looks for a moment on the replay like he has been pulled backwards by somebody, and that's why he is maybe 2 yards deeper than everybody else in the U.S. team. It is a bit of an optical illusion. It's basically Richards and Montes pushing and pulling each other, and then Freeman just runs right by them both, and I'm not sure why. He's not marking anybody. He's not really covering the near post. It's a minor moment. It's a quick second decision, but it ends up costing the U.S. pretty dearly, and it felt like there were a number of those moments in this game and in other games in this tournament that have me still pretty concerned about the right back spot.
Yeah, he just didn't look settled, Alex Freeman, in this tournament really as a whole, and certainly not in this game. I thought some of his 1v1 defending was actually pretty good in this game, up against Vega quite often, or at times Gallardo on that side. But whenever he would have to scramble defensively, where Mexico would send a runner in behind, and he would, and that's been a theme, by the way, for Freeman all the way through the tournament, through the summer. Whenever he has to go and turn and track back to make a play on the ball, I don't think he thrives in those moments. And it just in general looked a little raw. You could see some of the things that make him an intriguing prospect. Even in this game, he's got a good slipped ball in the 11th minute, good line breaker in the 17th minute, some good defending back at the right back spot in the 18th minute. Had some good moments.
Yeah, he almost scores right at the end of the first half.
Yeah, absolutely. He's got some of the athletic traits that you really like. He can turn and actually stay with somebody 1v1 because he has that lateral quickness and strength and burst. But he's also just raw. I think you could see maybe that he hasn't played a lot of professional soccer in his life, that he has not played at a level higher than MLS in his life and has not even played a full MLS season yet, where on some of those defensive moments, again, I know we've used the word already multiple times today, but it's just naive. That's what keeps playing for me over and over again. Whether that is the positioning, and I don't think he was helped by all of the cascading issues that happened higher up the field that we've already talked about. But there's just moments where Gallardo's running at him with a head of steam, and Freeman just doesn't quite look like he knows which foot to put in or how to position himself. So no, I was hoping that we were going to see Alex Freeman impact player like we do with Orlando, and I think that we didn't see that really ever this summer. And part of that is that he didn't play his position for most of this summer.
Yeah.
But when he did, he wasn't impactful. And that theme for Freeman, I want to be clear, is not unique to him. Like, I want to take us to a different part of the field. We talked about Diego Luna a lot, and coming out of the March window, we talked about Diego Luna. I don't want to do the full retrospective because we're going to do more of that this week, but Luna wasn't really that impactful for the U.S. in games that mattered this summer, and he certainly wasn't impactful in this final, right? Like, I know that Luna comes up with some goal contributions, but like in this game, in the U.S.'s biggest game of the tournament, he wasn't any good. Like, I went in pretty hard on Malik Tillman, who I think we all have probably larger expectations for based off of his club pedigree. One of these players is moving to Bayer Leverkusen for $40 million, and the other is not, right? So there's some context here. I went in pretty hard on Tillman, who was bad in this game, who was sloppy, who was lackadaisical with his movement. He was a frustrating watch in this game and was ineffective. A lot of the same things apply to Luna, who was motoring around the field a little bit more defensively than Tillman, which was pleasing. But really, he's there to be a change of pace player on the ball. He's there to create a little bit and just did not do that in this game. 11th minute, tries to combine with Ajuman, doesn't come off. That's okay. 12th minute, really nice ball to Berhalter to give him his due.
Yeah.
16th
that was
minute,
his only moment.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like you have some good moments in the first 15 minutes, in the first 15 that we talked about already, where the U.S. is in the game. 17th minute, we're past that 15-minute stretch, loses the ball 1v1. 37th minute, turnover. 45th minute, shot over the bar. 82nd minute, sloppy pass, turnover, where the U.S. cannot afford that because they're looking to equalize. Luna was not involved in this game nearly enough and was not effective when he was on the ball. And that is a lot of what he's here to do. I know he was not maximized by the context of this game and how much of the ball Mexico had, but he's there to impact the game. And we saw that when he's asked to be one of the two guys, along with Malik Tillman, in a game against a higher level opposition than the U.S. had faced this summer in the Gold Cup specifically, he didn't have it. And that ties back to the friendlies, where I don't think he had it against Turkey really either.
Yep. I would extend that level of analysis and critique to Luca de la Torre, who, like, as a way of comparison, this is a somewhat deep-cut reference, but to go back to the 2006 World Cup, as we so often do, I remember in the final group stage game, the U.S. still has an opportunity to advance against Ghana. It's 1-1 at the time, and then I think Claudio Reyna gets injured and goes off, and his replacement is Ben Olsen. I love Ben Olsen. I enjoy Ben Olsen, the player. Ben Olsen is not Claudio Reyna, and I remember in that moment being like, even if they advance, I don't think that they're going to look all that great with Ben Olsen starting in place of Claudio Reyna. And I think if Weston McKennie gets hurt, I don't feel that great about Luca de la Torre starting in place of him. If Tyler Adams is hurt, the same goes. I'm assuming Johnny would be the replacement from Tyler Adams. We don't get to see him in this tournament. But Luca de la Torre, I thought, was once again somewhat anonymous. I think he has moments. I feel like if I watched this maybe a third time, I would notice more of Luca de la Torre. But in a game where we needed sort of some steals, some positional discipline, I just think once again we didn't really see it. So he remains a depth option, but I think somewhat further down the ranks.
Yeah, I know we're going to go into this deeper on Wednesday as we kind of do our post-mortem of the tournament, but a little preview of that from me. He was my most disappointing player of the tournament, because I think other players you can kind of mitigate. Like Freeman wasn't as good as I was hoping he was going to be, but he's in his first full senior season. Max Arsene having to play a position that he doesn't play at club level. De La Torre, I was fully ready coming out of those couple friendlies where in that game against Turkey I thought he was really good, and just was barely involved in any of the games that he played for the US at this tournament. Like even this match, you look at his touches and his passing numbers, it's below Adams and Berhalter, and this is the sort of game where you need a short possession guy to get their foot in the ball, and it just felt like that was more likely to be Berhalter than De La Torre, which I didn't expect coming into this tournament. And that was the same against Guatemala. I made exactly the same criticism. I've basically said the same thing about De La Torre after every match at this tournament. And he is a guy who has been great for San Diego this year. He's played in Europe. He's got the experience. He shouldn't have the naivety that other players have, and just didn't deliver. So, yeah, he made me sad.
Also sad were some people on Blue Sky. We've got some Blue Sky takeaways here that I think go from saddest, angriest to most okay. T-Bear 101, which is not me, I promise. Pat can't play again. Correct, the tournament's over. Very surprising game from Adams. Can't really get a feel of what Poch wants this team to look and play like. Joe, do you feel like you have a good idea of how Poch wants this team to play, or at least what he wants them to look like?
I guess it depends on how narrowly you want to define a good idea. I think again, we saw the U.S. play against the ball in this game in a macro sense, not a surprise, against worse teams or against teams that are happy to cede the ball, that are basically equal to the U.S. They're going to have the ball, and they're going to use that 3-2-5 structure for the most part defensively. We've seen 4-4-2 in, I think, literally every game for Pochettino. So there are some pretty consistent themes, but I think over the last hour or so, we've done a pretty good job of explaining why the U.S. were disjointed and maybe why T-Bear is not seeing the full picture after a game like this one.
Aaron on Blue Sky says these players, including the regular starters, are not built for a high possession system. Why is it such a distasteful idea to so many USMNT fans to play a pressing, counterattacking game?
Hey.
Point 2, we have no fullbacks besides Robinson and Dest. We have no wings beside Pulisic and Weah.
Yeah, those. Sorry to jump in. I don't know if we're jumping. I've never been on the show.
Jump on in, my friend.
Takeaways. This is fun. I'm liking this a lot. The first point is 0% relevant after this game. As far as the U.S.'s approach, that is not at all the game that we just watched, and I don't actually think that many U.S. fans are opposed to the U.S. playing against the ball whatsoever. I think that's kind of made up. But the other two and three, no fullbacks besides Jedi and Dest, and no wingers besides Pulisic and
Matt Barger, we lost the game, but I refound my fandom. The team's ex-dog, expected dog in them got restored to normal levels. USA instigating the afters and bringing the aggression is exactly what this team needed. Poch got what he needed out of this, found solid depth for next year's tournament. We've teased the upcoming show in which we're going to do some kind of like bigger takeaways, a bigger look back at the Gold Cup. I think that's a really interesting point because maybe this is just posturing from him, but a lot of the post-game comments from Pochettino about depth and about the starters returning were met with, this was my starting team. What are you talking about? And I think Henry Bushnell listed the players that were missing, to which he responded like, that's your list. Like, you've already come up with a list. And it sort of implies that maybe those players are going to have to prove that they belong, and maybe that's just him posturing. But I think we are entering a very interesting time period in which maybe some players have annoyed Pochettino a little bit, and we're going to find out just how annoyed he is with some of his future selections.
That September window is going to be so interesting.
Yep.
It's South Korea and Japan, right? Yeah. I can't wait to see the roster drop for that window because I cannot shake the feeling that we're going to see more of these Gold Cup players than a lot of people are anticipating. That's just a hunch. That's kind of just based on the vibes from Pochettino, to your point, Taylor, about what he had to say after this game. And he's got to... Like some of those players, obviously, Dest is recovering from an injury. Robinson has surgery, right? That's how. So I can't imagine there's much beef with those players. There is going to have to be some form of reconciliation with the captain of this team. Like that's going to be interesting. And look, I anticipate that's going to happen, and Pulisic will be back in the squad, and it'll all be fine. But seeing how that all shakes out, where we've now got the evidence of these fringe players and how many make it into Poch's strongest squad in September, it's going to be fascinating. I can't wait for that.
People who don't want to see Adjumang again, I've got some bad news for you. Final note from Blue Sky, from Garrett Lucius. I'm going to agree with this one. We would have won if Alexi's hat was bigger and if Joe were more of an outlaw. Those two things combined would have made the difference. But Graham Ruthven, thank you very much for going over an hour to break down the U.S.'s loss in the Gold Cup final. I feel a little bit better, even if I still feel a little bit sad.
Thank you, Taylor Rockwell. To Garrett, no such thing as a bigger hat than Alexis was wearing in the game. So,
you know what, Graham? I lied. I'm not going to let you off the hook yet. I'm going to need to hear that growl.
No, keep that for the Patreon.
All right, fine. Over on the Patreon, Graham has now promised he will growl. Joe Lowery, thank you for making me feel better about the simplified prongs that are the USMNT. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you for not asking me to growl over the air. Much appreciated.
Joe, you want to go ahead and growl? There we go. Thank you, Joe. Listeners, thank you all so much for listening and supporting the show. We do have the Patreon where we will be talking about something. Do we know what we're talking about on Patreon today?
Something. I think it's 10 minutes of growling, I think, is what we've established.
Just different growls, different levels of Graham growl to establish what emotion is behind them. Be sure to listen to that. We've got some MLS chat tomorrow. We've got some more USMNT. We've got some Club World Cup. We've got some listener questions to round out the week. It's going to be a busy one. It's going to be a fun one, so make sure you join us. Congratulations to Ryan Bailey for seeing Oasis, the happiest moment of the weekend for us all, and we'll talk to you again very soon.